Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folari. Alongside my colleague today, I'm really being spoiled for choice. This morning I have Solomon Ajuzeogo, also well known to our TVC viewers. Thank you very much for coming on, a multifaceted man. And this morning,
thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And this morning we shall be talking. We'll see if we can find a way to throw a ball in the middle of it, but very, very unlikely, because we're going to be talking two things. One, the oil and gas park. The oil and gas park, as you know, it's already being constructed, especially the one in Cross River. The one in Cross River, and I understand that there are quite a number of them, but the one in Cross River is our focus because that, I understand, got an injection of 2.9 billion naira for a water and firefighting component to be added. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll be dealing with an oil and gas expert, Mr. Bala Zaka. And then we'll also see if we can touch on something that happened last week, actually, last week Wednesday at the virtual Federal Executive Council meeting, where Council injected $1.2 billion into the agri sector. We shall be having presidential spokesman Ajuri Ngilali, to spread that out a bit more for us, and let's see the impact of that. But let's start off first with give us some sort of a background. Here's a report that went out earlier.
Another Federal Executive Council meeting to give approval to memos, award contracts, and set in motion policy implementation strategies that will oil the wheel of governance. President Muhammadu Buhari is in charge of the virtual meeting that considered and approved 6 memos. At the end of the day, journalists were briefed about the federal government's plan to further improve the infrastructure at the National Oil and Gas Park that will be sited in Odukbani, Cross Rivers State.
Today, Council approved the provision of water and fire service equipment in the National Oil and Gas Park to be sited in Odukbani, Cross River State, in the sum of 2.9 billion naira. The Oil and Gas Park scheme is to provide an environment, a corridor, for siting industries that will produce components locally for the oil and gas industry.
The Federal Executive Council also granted approval to a request from the Ministry of Transport to train 20 cadets that will work on foreign vessels.
The training of seafarers on board foreign vessels for sea time, and it was for a total of $454,000.50 to Messrs. Sweat Nigeria Limited, that the contract was awarded to, for 20 cadets.
Minister of Information and Culture says the Executive Council also granted approvals to memos from the Ministries of Works, Aviation, Finance and Education.
Aviation was an approval was given for the revised estimated cost for the construction of a Boeing 737 full flight simulator building for the Nigerian College of Aviation Technologies area.
The virtual FEC meeting is helping the president defy the limitations of physical distancing caused by the pandemic. On other fronts, the president continues to lead in the national response against the spread of the coronavirus. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, you can see there was a mix of stuff, but as I said, we want to talk about 2 subject matters this morning. So that report, sort of highlighted the meeting of yesterday, and the key highlight there, Solomon, is you know, the 2.9 billion naira, you know, a princely sum that's been approved by council so that the Odukbani oil and gas park in Cross River can be sort of, you know, made even better. We'll come to talk about that. We'll come to talk about that. But maybe we should just turn it around a bit and talk about agriculture. Agriculture, well, maybe we should start first with agriculture. And as I said, it's remarkable that $1.2 billion this time now. The other figure I gave was in naira. This time, $1.2 billion, and it's been approved by the Federal Executive Council for injection. This was last Wednesday. And as I said, our man, Ajuri Ngilali, you know, I think okay, good morning, Ajuri.
Good morning, Mr. Yori.
Okay, thanks as always for coming on. I'm in studio alongside Solomon Ajuzi-Ogu.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Indeed. Now, let's start with agriculture. We have two things to talk about, but let's go back to the beginning, as it were, for this program. That is Wednesday last week, the first ever virtual Federal Executive Council meeting. And one of the highlights for most people, although it might not have been as widely reported as you would have thought, was the 1.2 billion, not naira, but dollars that was injected into the agriculture sector by approval of the Federal Executive Council. Could you tell us about that and the impact of that is expected to have on agriculture?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Yori. So this is a very, very critical component of what we're doing, not just in the agricultural sector, but in terms of the larger economic diversification plan of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari. This is how it works. We signed a deal, an MOU with the Brazilian government called the Green Imperative. I would ask any of our viewers if they have a moment to, at some point, to Google the Green Imperative to get further details. But this is how it works. We are going to, as a result of this deal, move very aggressively into agricultural mechanization. The reason why that's important for us is, of course, we have been utilizing antiquated, very labor-intensive manual agricultural production techniques across farms, across goods, across this country. And for us to be able to compete favorably with the Vietnams, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, in terms of agricultural production, we have to mechanize, and we have to do it very quickly, and we have to do it very comprehensively. And they have been mechanized since the 50s, 60s, and 70s, so we're generations behind now in terms of competing effectively in the international agricultural market. So how it works is we, as a result of this deal, we are going to establish 780 service centers in all local government areas of the Federation. Within the 780 service centers, you're going to have 632 that are going to be involved in the assembly and production of agricultural mechanization equipment like tractors and other supplements like that. That our farmers would be able to access local government by local government to be able to, of course, enhance not just the volumes of their production, but also to enhance the efficiency and enhance the quality of the goods that they are producing, right? So that's how that's going to work. And we're going to be able to, the target is to employ 5 million Nigerians across these centers. And so basically what you have with the service centers is not just the assembly of these mechanical equipments, but also the maintenance, the sustainable jobs that will be established to maintain these equipments over the long term, so that we're not in the usual traditional Nigerian situation where we procure, break down, then procure again. We want to avoid that. So that's what we're going to do with 632 out of the 780. Now, the other 148 centers are very strategic. They're going to be the agro-processing facilities. You know, for decades now, Africa has always been known for exporting raw materials. And so we send our soybeans to Germany. They process and refine our soybeans into vegetable oil, put in a fancy plastic package, sell it back to us at 4 times. So instead of earning dollars by exporting, finished products, we are paying more dollars to import these finished products and all of that. So we're going to reverse that. These agro-processing facilities are are going to be processing into finished goods all sorts of raw materials that our farms are producing. Cocoa will be processed into finished chocolate, soybeans into vegetable oil, cassava, etc., down the line. And so these agro-processing facilities will be across the country and will ensure that instead of being a net exporter of raw materials, we are now a net exporter of finished products that can compete with any nation in the world. And of course, that will enhance our export earnings and our larger economic diversification efforts.
Who or what body is going to be overseeing all of this? Let me explain. I asked the question in the context of we're going to be talking, differently about the Odukwane Oil and Gas Park in Cross River, and there the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board is like overseeing all of that. Now, what you've just explained, the scope of it, it surely will need monitoring and coordination. Or how is that going to work for accountability and making sure that objectives are indeed realized?
Well, that's a great question. This is how essentially it works when we talk about accountability. Almost every deal that President Muhammadu Buhari has entered into over the last 5 years has strategically been directed toward government-to-government transactions. So, because the president is aware of how we have mismanaged, large-scale contracts over a period of time in terms of the traditional Nigerian bureaucratic process, diversion, issues within the National Assembly, then issues within the MDAs in terms of corruption and all of that. He has now said, okay, how do we bypass that as much as possible, particularly on these large volume contracts like the one we're talking about? And the strategy has been to work with other governments to secure the funding in such a manner that the funding is provided by those governments, then we now repay them in such a way that we don't have to worry about procurement fraud and diversion and all of that. Our own is really about oversight and project supervision as opposed to all of these other issues, so that these contractors are doing the work they're supposed to do. We are oversighting them, but in no way are we undermining the process of the actual completion of these projects. So we've seen that with Russia in terms of the MOU signed on Ajeokuta through the Russian Export Center. We have seen that with the Germans in terms of the Siemens Power deal. It's the same kind of arrangement where the German Export Credit Agency is supplying the funding to Siemens with a small counterpart fund directly from the Federation account to the Germans, for example, to do the Siemens deal. The idea is to continue to bypass Nigerian bureaucracy on issues of procurement so that we can avoid corruption and ensure that we get to completion and optimal completion of these various items. So this deal is in conjunction with the Brazilian government, another government-to-government transaction, and we're going to be working actively with them in terms of the implementation of the project through the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. But in terms of funding and how money will be shared and all of that, it is not going to go through the traditional, Nigerian bureaucracy where some of these issues around transparency will arise. The president is actually determined, like he did with the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, the second Niger Bridge.
Because I've got to go on a quick break. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, and we were speaking with presidential spokesperson Ajuri Ngelale, and he was really carrying forth on the $1.2 billion sort of injection approval by the Federal Executive Council last week, Wednesday. And Ajuri, you're still with us? Ajuri, can you still hear us?
I'm with you.
Oh, okay, yeah. So now you were at pains to explain that because I wanted to know who was going to be overseeing and monitoring all of this, and you explained that largely it's not one of those situations where monies, it's totally different from the other thing we're going to be talking about, where a specific company was awarded, in the case of the oil and gas parks that we're going to be talking about shortly, a specific company was won that particular contract. This is not like that. as you were explaining, it has to do with one-on-one relations with governments as opposed to a million different companies all over the place.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's why, and that was the strategy. It's the same strategy that we deployed in the Siemens deal. For us, it's very important when you have a situation where you're bringing in so many different companies. And we saw this with the NIPPs, for example, in those days under the NDPHC. When you bring hundreds of different companies, some companies will bring a high-quality service using high-quality goods. Some companies will not. They will use cheap goods and all of that. So you don't have the synergy in terms of the components of whatever you're constructing and all of that. This avoids that. When you can get single source, and you know who you're working with across a larger platform, there's a consistency in the standard of goods that are going to be used, and the consistency in even the standard of implementation and construction across the board. And that's very important to the president. And that's why you're seeing that consistent trend across sectors. But I want to just touch on the oil and gas parks. Very important.
Sorry, Ajuri, forgive me, but I wanted you to stay on this subject a bit more. And that's because you spoke about enhancing the value. We ourselves, following, I don't know if one should say it like that, but following in the footsteps of Ghana, because the president of Ghana has been saying that no more, all this exploitation of exporting our raw materials. Now we are going to be processing our own cocoa. We're going to be exporting chocolate. We're going to be finishing our own gold. We're going to be exporting that. And there was an aspect of this that you touched on where there was going to be an emphasis, right? There was going to be an emphasis on refining our own products.
That's right. Absolutely. So out of the 780 centers across the local governments, 148 are for agro-processing facilities. These are to ensure that when we talk about, like you said, cocoa into chocolate, soybeans into vegetable oil, all of these high consumption, high demand items on the international market, we're making sure that because we have so much production in these areas, in our farms across this country, let us take advantage of that and let us stop this trend of exporting raw materials. And so fortunately, as the president put together this deal with the Brazilians, he had every element of this process in mind from the start to the finish, making sure that while the CBN has continued to make major interventions in terms of giving seedlings to our farmers, giving low-interest facilities to our farmers to be able to access what they require in terms of, increasing their production, slashing the price of fertilizer in half, over the last 5 years to encourage further production. We have seen the benefits of that. When you look at, for example, what we've done over the last 5 years in rice, sugar, wheat, and fish, import substitution with local production, it's now about how do we expedite that process.
Okay.
And for us, mechanization is the way to go. And then as we're doing that, we're now going to the next level of saying we're going to process all of these things. As we enhance production of raw materials, we're going to also bring in the processing components so that we have an enhancement of not just raw production, but the export ultimately of finished goods so that we can actually be the kind of economy that can compete with the Germanys of the world.
Fine, excellent. Thank you very much. Now, we could talk about this for forever, because it sounds like such an exciting bundle. But we want to go on to the other aspect now that we wanted to talk about this morning, which is the oil and gas park. And we also have with us, of course, I note that you wanted to say something about that, and you will have an opportunity. But we have our oil and gas expert, Malam Bala Zaka. He's joining us via Skype, and so Ajuri, stay on the line with us as you listen to him, and no doubt you can come back on. So good morning, Malam Bala Zaka.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, watchers and listeners.
Okay, then. Now, the difference between the two subjects is that, as the presidential spokesman was explaining, the $1.2 billion that was injected into the agricultural sector is not quite the same kind of modus as this, where a specific company, we understand, has been awarded, and now we revert to Naira. We're talking Naira now. I think it was, 2.9 billion Naira that's been awarded for the firefighting and water and firefighting sector of the oil and gas park at Udupane. First of all, maybe just tell us very briefly what exactly an oil and gas park is.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to really appreciate this government. You know who I am. I mean, I'm a very neutral person, but I really want to appreciate this government for that initiative. When you talk about an oil and gas park, you're basically talking about a hub to internally domesticate and focus on the production of basic oil and gas equipment, but to, at the end of the day, contribute to the aggregate value chain. If you're talking about a country, national aggregate value chain or global value chain. In the context of Nigeria, that initiative actually came within this dispensation, and that's why I'm basically appreciating them. There are going to be actually 5 pilot parks. That initiative started just to make sure, first of all, we take care of, or we look at that pilot scheme from what we basically call, and it's not to be contested, the prolific Niger Delta Basin. And these parks are going to be 5 in number, the pilot parks. We have, the first one was actually Emel in Bayelsa State. Then now we have Odukpani. After Odukpani, we are going to Imo State. There will be a park in Imo State. There will be a park in Akwa Ibom State. And there will be another park in Delta State. That's now Niger Delta Basin. And the intention is, if this pilot scheme works well, it will be extended to other basins within the country. Like, we have the Dahomey Basin, which is the Lagos axis, where we recently discovered some quantity of crude oil. It will also be extended to Anambra Basin. It will be extended to Benue Trough and possibly the Gongola Basin and Sokoto Basin and Chad Basins. When we talk about these basins, we're talking about locations where you have potentials for oil and gas. But to be fair and to be realistic, we have to start with the prolific basin, which in this case is called the Niger Delta Basin. And it is within the Niger Delta Basin that you have now the first one, which was the Emel in Bayelsa. Now we are in Cross River, Odukpani. The intention is to probably go to Imo State, then Akwa Ibom and Delta. But which one will come after Odukpani is what is left to the government.
Well, I hope, Malam Balazaka, I'm just thinking, we are talking about all of this in the context of talk, proposals. We hope that this is not going to sound like one of those white elephant projects, projects that keep running and really don't end, and we don't see the results.
A lot of us who are practitioners in the oil and gas industry also hope the same. But if you look at it, I think even before the coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic, we noticed that, as Nigeria was truly an import-dependent country, and we noticed that our currency was getting weaker and weaker, either through depreciation or through devaluation. And we knew what we were suffering from: subsidy imports. Fuel distillate imports in this case. And we were always thinking or suggesting to the government to look for ways to internally domesticate some of these services. Not that we are going to shield or move away completely from being a global member of the oil and gas industry globally. But to be honest and fair to you, Nigeria has developed enough technical capacity and competence to the point where we should be able to have what we now technically call national oil and gas parks, to be able to produce some components that will contribute in delivering services and quality to the oil and gas industry, whether you talk about upstream, midstream, or downstream. And that will be good for us.
Okay, Malam Zaka, please hold it for us. We're going to take another break. And Ajuri, I'll come straight to you when we return from the break. Okay, welcome back. Still here with Solomon Juzi Ogu, and we have on the lines, so to speak, Malam Balazaka, our oil and gas expert, and Ajuri Ngilale, SSA to the President on Public Affairs. Now, Ajuri, would you like to comment on Solomon's question to Malam Zaka about hoping this wasn't going to be an white elephant project that just goes on and on and on?
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Yori. First of all, let me just say that the concern raised by my brother is a legitimate concern.
Yeah,
because when you look at the last 50 years of our history, you will know that many of the things we have done in terms of major projects have always, tended to fall apart as a result of corruption and fraud, diversion, and all of that. So I don't blame him for asking the question. But I would just ask him and all of our viewers to pay attention to the actions of this particular administration and how we have handled major projects. If you look at Lagos Rail Line, there was nothing on the ground in 2017. Now in 2020, people are doing free rides all the way from Lagos to Ibadan, right? When people look at the Second Niger Bridge, they didn't see not even a pillar. Now, not only have we done all of the pillars, but now we're now doing the bridging of the road on top of the pillars. So people can see that something has shifted, that there's progress on the ground, and it's being done very quickly. And I think actions speak louder than words when you talk about credibility. But as it relates to the oil and gas parks, one of the things I think we should all appreciate is that we are at a moment now where we're doing Train 7, a $12 billion extension of the NLNG Train 7 project to ensure that we are going to add 1/3 of our total current gas capacity to our total current capacity over the next 5 years. When you're embarking on multi-billion-dollar projects like that, and that's just gas, so I'm not even talking of the new deep offshore exploration projects like Zaba Zaba that we're getting into. These companies need technology, and it's these oil and gas parks that are going to enable us to ensure that all those things we would take from South Korea, the fabrication, all of these components
if I may ask you, Ajuri,
we're going to source them locally.
If I may ask you, this sounds laudable. Is there a timeline for the accomplishment of these things? Because sometimes it seems once an administration that initiated a project leaves the scene, another one comes in and just discontinues it. Is there a timeline within this administration to round off all of this?
Yeah, thank you very much. So pretty much every project we've put out, I'm talking of major infrastructure projects, we have given our people a very clear timeline so that they can hold us accountable to it. For example, we said Lagos-Ibadan rail line will be 2020. We have finished the rail line. When we say Second Niger Bridge will be 2022, then it's going to be 2022, and we're going to be held accountable to that promise. For the national oil and gas parks, what you have is about a 2 to 3 year timeline because all of us are looking very keenly at ensuring that these major projects that are going on in terms of NLNG expansion, like I said, with Train 7, with the new deep offshore projects that are coming on stream. I only mentioned Zaba Zaba, but there are several projects. As the oil prices rebound and IOCs come back and settle down and bring in their rigs, you're going to have even more projects. It's very critical that we understand that some countries like South Korea, Singapore, where they're not even producing oil, they have made billions of dollars. I'm talking of tens of billions of dollars. And over the course of decades, over $100 billion in the oil services sector. That means that they have fabrication yards where they're producing all of the various component parts that people that IOCs in Nigeria will now go to Singapore to go and bring in those component parts, building ships, building all of these rigs and all of that. They do it there. So for us, we have to start now, and we have to do it aggressively because, of course, we have missed the opportunity for decades. But now that we have an administration that understands how to run an economy and how to build backwards in terms of backward integration and making sure that we create jobs at every level of the value chain, we can now use this opportunity to ensure that these oil and gas parks, particularly the three run by NCDMB, that is Odukpani in Cross River, Akwa Ibom, and also in Bayelsa, Ogbia land in Bayelsa. It's very key that we not only build the parks, which we're doing, but we're also intentionally, through our other ministries, building the allied infrastructure around those oil and gas parks. Like, for example, now, we have just last year we approved the award of 50 billion naira for the Calabar Itu Odupani expressway, the dualization of that expressway as a result of the projects like the oil and gas park that will be there. So it's an integrated plan that we are faithfully administering to ensure that we are the ones who do the fabrication and the manufacturing of all the component parts that we will be using in our oil and gas projects.
Ajuri, I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much, Ajuri. As always, give us a full answer for a better and more robust understanding of what the issue is. Thank you very much, Ajuri Ngelale, Senior Special Assistant in the Presidency on Public Affairs. Thank you very much for, giving us some of your time this morning. And now, Mr. Balazaka, you're still with us.
Yes.
You've explained for those who the concept might be new to, or what an oil and gas park is. It's a corridor, and as Ajuri was also explaining there that you started on, it's about setting up allied businesses, allied needs, the provisions of them. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, it's not a proposal anymore. It's actually, there is serious work, at least in the case of Odukpani and Ogbia. These ones works, bricks are actually being put on top of bricks. This is not paperwork, it's not proposal stage anymore, right?
You're correct. But I also appreciated the concerns that your colleague Solomon expressed. The reason is because we've seen this over time. A particular dispensation will come up with an initiative. Then along the line, at national level, maybe for whatever reasons, that good initiative will be jettisoned. So, and as Nigerians have actually been described, unfortunately, there is this description on our head, or toga on our head, that Nigerians are not bereft of ideas. It's just consistency and implementation that has been our problem. But in the case of these national oil parks, I think something tells me that it's going to continue into perpetuity. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board was not set up by this dispensation. It was actually set up by probably two presidential or two previous dispensations, and we had the act in 2010. Now we have a completely different political party in power and a set of different political leaders in power, but they saw the need to continue with that vision. And that's what we have always wanted to see. And if it continues, believe me, there have been so many services or equipment that we have to wait for experts to come and guide us. With that, any moment from now, we will start providing those services, even slightly away from the oil and gas industry. Didn't you see what happened to the road construction and the rail construction, how they all stopped? Because some Asians were out of the country and we were hit by this pandemic. But with the oil and gas industry, I think they have been fairly consistent. All we will advise or suggest is let them continue to support the board. Because outside this, I was also surprised when I noticed what the government was actually giving them. For people like me who are practitioners in the oil and gas industry, for every service you render, if you cut your invoice, 1% of that invoice value will go to the development of what we call it 1% NCD, meaning 1% Nigerian content development. So 1% of every invoice value goes to the support or for the support and development of that board. So if the government is giving them something now, in addition to what they are receiving, to be honest, though I don't know how much it costs to construct or put up a park, but I see it as a very good relationship and a very good synergy. I actually was thinking the money was going to come from the 1% that service providers have been contributing from their invoice value. So if this government is now supplementing or helping them with something despite the economic calamities that the entire globe is facing and what we are facing in Nigeria. I think that for the first on its own is worthy of praise and emulation.
To the tune of $1.2 billion. Now, Akinola has called in from Ekiti. Good morning, Mr. Akinola.
Good morning, sir.
Please go ahead.
It's okay. There is one salient, important point I want us to understand as far as the world is concerned. The world is moving towards physical planning. And without planning regulations, all these laudable projects are very good. But without town planning system in the country, well regulated, managed, all these projects will just be a white elephant project. I don't know, all the experts have spoken, but the question is there any environmental impact assessment of this project? Where they are located, do they employ a town planner to be able to take cognizance of the site management, site location, site selection, and all other physical planning management, the environmental impact to adjoining environment, the hazard, and all other negative influence that all these projects we have with the people that are living around the citation of the project. In short, in summary, please, any development that will go on in the country without physical planning regulation is null and void. I think the government should be able to note that.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Akinola, for calling
yes,
in.
Sir.
Appreciate your call. On the one hand, I would have said you could tell. I would have said that maybe there are many who would take your concerns, that is to say, the consideration of them, for granted. Actually, if you know these things, how much less experts that would have gone to this extent. But I'll let Mr. Malam Balazaka comment, if you will. Now, the concerns raised by Mr. Akinola, that somehow might it be possible for those behind these schemes to have missed all those important salient points?
To be honest, if there is any sector that takes environmental impact assessment into consideration, if there is any sector at all, not only within Nigeria or globally, it's the oil and gas industry. The reason why I'm saying this is because they are very, very conscious of what the impact of oil spill does to the environment, how it biodegrades the environment, how it generates what we call carcinogenic substances, and how it affects health. Apart from that, again, it also takes certain physical things into consideration. Whenever you want to go to an area for things.
Okay, it froze momentarily. It will be. Okay, so while it froze, let me bring up another caller, Shino in Shomolu. Good morning, Mr. Shino.
Hello, good morning, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for calling in. Good morning.
Yeah, I'm happy that you digressed a little this morning from the usual public stuff. And I'm happy that Mr. Bala is there because I know him very well to be an expert. I'm happy that he's going to bring justice to the issue of ground. The issue of ground is an issue of agri and, oil. Yes, now, what is my concern right now is last week or 2 weeks ago, they said the price of, oil will be reduced to 108 naira. Up to now, we have not seen anything done about it. They are still selling at the normal rate of 125 naira per liter. That is that. Secondly, let me chip in this at the same time that 3 weeks ago, the government said that we should not pay electricity bill for April and May. But yet, what do you call it? The electricity suppliers are thinking that we have to pay the money. proceeding. I don't know what investment can, do for such a place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for calling in. As you said, Malam Balazaka is an oil and gas expert. You went to power. I don't know, Solomon.
Well, I won't be talking about the issues of power, basically, but importantly, I will assume it's a general assumption here. EIA's Environmental Impact Assessment that the first caller raised is a given in the oil and gas sector.
Yeah. That is Mr. Addition, I think.
I mean, it's a given. It's a health and safety issue first and foremost, and so you have to carry out these impact assessments.
That is anybody who is remotely even pretending to be serious about such a project. So all the issues that gentleman raised would have been the primary things to be
very elementary.
Very elementary.
So, but I must say that we've been here talking about parks and structures of this nature. We've been here before in the 60s where we developed parks, different industrial parks. Now, this is specific to a sector, an industry, oil and gas. We've been here before, only that after the 1966 push, we seem to have just gradually left these things behind and all of that. Here we are going back to them. And I must say that the idea of the oil and gas parks in these 5 places across the country, Odukpani, Emeyali in Ogbia, local government in Bayelsa, Odukpani in Cross River, we have Oguta in my own Imo state, we have Akwe in Akwa Ibom, and of course the one in Delta, was brought on board when Ibe Kachuku was Minister of State for...
Could I interrupt you for a while? I'm sorry, because Mr. Yakub has called in from Ifo. Good morning, Mr. Yakub, and thank you for holding on a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Shishari. And then good morning, Mr. Solomon.
Good morning.
Mr. Ayori, to buttress the point that the last caller made, it is only this country... first and foremost, I'm very, very sure that Nigerian government officials are always watching this program. And then anytime you brought on Mr. Balasaka, they always give us in total everything that is going on in the oil and gas industry. But to my surprise, I don't think the Nigerian government are listening to him. Why am I saying that? Chief Jody, I can tell you today, I think last 2 weeks or so, if I don't make a mistake, we learned that the petroleum price is going down. And then we was told that NNPC station should be selling petroleum price at rate of 105, if I'm correct. But if we still buying it 125, thereabouts up to today. Chief Jody, today, if Nigerian government made a pronounce that the petroleum price is now 250 or 300 per liter, immediately effect, all the petrol stations will just jack it up. They will never tell Nigeria that we still have goods. So this is the time Nigeria, where is civil society organization?
All right.
To be able to protest against all these things that these people are doing to us. But I can't wait for Dangote Refinery to come up, because I want to know how the petroleum price will fare that time. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you very much for calling in, Mr. Yakub. We've addressed this in a slightly different way before, whereupon we were informed. We had an expert on then who had explained that actually there's a range. There's a range within which petrol stations are allowed to sell. Let them put competition into let them bring it to bear. If you want, sell at the lower end of the scale. If you want, but there is a range beyond which you shall not go above. But let me allow the experts to comment on that. Malam Zaka, would you like to speak on that issue, please?
Yes. To be honest, I sympathize with our government at the moment. We are in what I can best describe as a difficult position now. But before now, to be honest, if you go to some countries, it's almost a taboo to export raw materials. But I was happy. I mean, senior special advisor or assistant of the government, spoke. It's almost a taboo, to export your raw materials. In other words, in Nigeria, we are not supposed to be exporting our cocoa. We are not supposed to be exporting our ginger. we're not supposed to export our cassava. Even when you talk about the oil and gas industry and the crude oil, we should refine a substantial quantity. And when you talk about the West African hub, we should be the ones supplying distillates to them. That's how it's supposed to be. Because even now that we are talking about this national park, we are basically talking about a hub that will be manufacturing certain equipment that we must not necessarily get from outside the country. So in like manners, we should have been the ones supplying petrol, diesel, even from our natural gas, you know, because natural gas is the raw material for ammonia. From ammonia, you get urea. From urea, you get fertilizer. We should be the ones supplying fertilizer to them. Mm-hmm. But like we said, this is, every time one or two things will happen, whether positively or negatively, that will make us want to put on our thinking cap.
Okay.
And if this is the time we need to put on our thinking cap, so be it.
Okay. Mazi Okorafor, thank you for holding on for a bit. Good morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Good morning, the sports master and Mr. Jere and others. Now, I want to find out from Mr. Jere, my brother, this issue of input, farm input, like fertilizer, like seedlings, how will the farmers get all this under this lockdown? And you know very well that we have 724 local governments in Nigeria, and there is no way a farmer in Nigeria can.
Well, Mazi, Mr. Ngilale, the senior special assistant that was speaking on that from the presidency that was speaking on that, he's left us now. So we're more with the oil and gas subject matter. But
now, the oil and subject, Mr. Yori. Now, if you look at the oil price now, the Saudi Arabia, this is the main actors. In Nigeria case now, our own has gone down now. Now, what do you think? Because likewise, we have been saying that if Nigeria has an alternative in terms of harnessing our resources in all the states, all this issue of oil will not be a case in this country. Because everybody, like every day, all the governors will dance down to Abuja to look for the oil money. And now, what do we do? Oil is coming down very soon. Now you hear the oil is coming down to $15 per barrel, and it's very, very disastrous. Now that one notwithstanding, the oil we are talking about, what is the hope of Nigeria if this oil decides to go down to $10 per dollar, that's per barrel?
Okay.
What will happen?
Oh, okay. Well,
where do we go from?
Malambala, you heard that?
Yes, yes, sir. I heard, and I will want to answer that.
Please go ahead.
Okay, what is really happening is this, between you and I and all watchers and listeners, the oil and gas industry will bounce back, quote me, in the next quarter, because virtually all economies are relying on what we call strategic reserves. And once these strategic reserves get emptied, or once they are getting to the point where they will be exhausted, between you and I, everything will bounce back, because without energy, there will virtually be no life. So before you know, all the industries will need to get back on stream, and they will require one form of power or the other. So the oil and gas industry will bounce back.
Okay.
But we are happy with the way people reacted to make sure we contain, confront, and defeat this pandemic. But the oil and gas industry will definitely bounce back.
Okay. Mr. Carlo in Idimu, you're our last caller. Good morning, sir. Please make it brief.
Good morning, Uncle Yori.
Good morning, sir. Please make it brief.
Thank you for the good work you are doing.
Very kind of you.
But the only thing, as I can see you, even though you won't see me, I know we are almost of the same bracket, the older generations.
Old school.
Yes, the old school. And if you put your ticket, there was a time they were telling you housing for us by the year 2000. Those who are saying that today, mean that 2000 will not come, but we're now in the year 2020. So what I want to change some of these narratives to show that things will be better for us. This is not the first time that we have all this type of policy being rolled out. We'll put in Owerri, we'll put in Delta, we'll put in this place. Very soon, when these are about 3 years to go.
But we can't ever give
when
up
they
hope.
Go, we'll start all over again.
Okay,
I want to give you an instance.
Okay,
just in Lagos State here, when Ambode was there, MOT, these people who could block roads, with their vehicle, checking your papers. Went into a holiday because there was some other system being developed by him.
Okay,
But now,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Carlo.
overboard.
Mr. Carlo, I really am sorry. I've got to interrupt. I did ask you to please make it brief, and that's because we've completely run out of time. In fact, really, we just have to take your contribution as a comment and a commentary. It's your prerogative. But it has been said that we can't ever lose hope. And if you had been with us, Mr. Bala had explained that, look, he can be among the most skeptical of people when it is necessary. But in this case, there is much to be hopeful about. Idea was put up by Mr. Ajuri Ngelale, but you still, it's your prerogative. Malam Zaka, we've come to the end. Would you, in just a few seconds, address the concern of Mr. Kalu that we've heard all of this before?
Yes. What I would just advise us to do is, it's not only in Nigeria that people are getting worried that their leaders are not doing enough. But at the end of the day, they are all human beings like us. In fact, they are part of us. They are brothers, uncles, sisters, and children to some of us. And for even people like me, who is a practitioner in the industry, I have my concerns. Because recently we heard that in probably 7 months, our own refineries in Nigeria have not been able to produce a liter of petrol. If that is really true, I felt very bad.
Okay, we've got to leave it there. Malam Zaka, I thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate your making time for us this morning, and we thank you dearly for it. Thank you very much. And we also extend our thanks to Ajuri Ngelale, Senior Special Assistant in the Presidency on Public Affairs, and indeed to all the other callers that did reach us on this particular subject matter. Well, quickly, I don't have much more time than to say that on behalf of Solomon, Ajiziogo, and I, do be safe and join us tomorrow for a fresh edition. I'm Yori Fulani. Bye-bye for now.